Many game franchises start off in three different ways: an underrated beauty, a boring and uninteresting experience, which can sometimes be overrated or sensational, and finally, an interesting game.
It is very strange how video games fall into these categories, and I guess that it's not just video games. I could say that films probably fall into these categories as well. But when you have a sequel like Duke Nukem Forever, which from its initial development was so overhyped, to the point it was just dragged through development hell, and then worked on by a publisher who just didn't really want to work on the project in the first place. And then when the product was initially released, it was, well, crap. Just utter crap.
There have been so many other cases of this scenario, I just can't list them all. But not all sequels end up this way. Some sequels work out very well, in fact. I mean, just look at the first Assassin's Creed versus the second Assassin's Creed. The original Doom versus Doom 2016. The list could go on and on and on. But there are certain criteria to form the sequels that we all love to play. And therefore, this will be the discussion that I will have with you all today. What makes a perfect sequel? Well, many factors go into it. If a franchise is fully established already, a sequel isn't too hard to pull off. If it's a franchise like Call of Duty, then in the next entry, they will just create new maps. If it's the Assassin's Creed franchise, then they'll change the setting. If it's the Need for Speed franchise, once again they'll just change the map. A sequel needs to have some real weight to it, you know? It can't just be a shallow rehash of an experience that has already been done before. A shallow rehash will get you nowhere. Yes, in theory you'll get money from the sales, but by doing this you will lose some form of credibility. And recently, credibility has become quite a big issue in the gaming scene. Do you think that if Black Ops 4 was a fantastic game, that Activision would have even bothered doing a soft reboot and changing the mechanics round for a fresh and new experience? No, they wouldn't have. They would have just kept on releasing the same old experience year on year. And that's the type of mindset that developers have these days. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's quite appalling, to be honest. But that's just the lay of the land. New entries into franchises need to innovate and expand on the gameplay that was established in the first game, and to create a new and innovative experience that both caters to the new and old fans respectively, not just make the same game again. Sequels don't necessarily need to update their graphics tremendously, because as we all know, graphics aren't everything. It's not the be-all and end-all when deciding to purchase a game. You're not thinking, oh, this hasn't got as good a graphics as this game. You're buying it because of the contents of the game. To be honest, it really depends on how long the sequel is released after the first game. No one is going to expect a big jump in graphics in just 1 year. I think that there would only be a big jump in graphics if the next game in the franchise was to release on the next generation of consoles.
I mean, look at Shenmue 3. The graphics still look like they're straight out of the PS2 era. And although you could argue that that's the aesthetic of the franchise, the graphics don't scream a 2-generation console crossover, do they? But then again, you could say that that could be what the developers YSNet.Inc. wanted. A literal continuation of the franchise, which is a bold way to keep a franchise moving.
One annoying thing that seems to happen with video game sequels is that in the gameplay trailers, the trailers and even the gameplay, there are features shown that don't actually exist in the final version of the game. It's just such a shame to see this type of stuff happen, because any game that usually has this problem has an enormous amount of hype surrounding it, and then ba-bam. The game is released, but without the promised features. And so since these features are missing, the game loses credibility and fades into the back catalogues of many gamers' archives. But other games do in fact deliver on their sequel promises, but most of the time these games are badly optimized. For example, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which is a poor excuse for a sequel. Now I'm going to elaborate on Ghost Recon Breakpoint briefly, just to describe how utterly bad this sequel is. Breakpoint is not only a buggy and broken mess with many clip-in issues, but the one defining feature that always pops out at me is the campaign. Not the actual story of the campaign, but the online variation of it. You could think one day that you want to play the campaign online with other people. Little do you know that you can't actually choose the mission you play. So in theory, you could want to play the campaign from start to finish in this online mode, and then straight away get launched into the final mission of the game. Like literally straight away. And then you're done with the campaign. That's it. Over. Now gameplay changes like this, they just seem a little crap to me, and I don't see why they're put in, and it utterly baffles me. But there, I am done with my little rant for Breakpoint.
I know that was slightly off topic, but these changes really do affect a game's overall appeal and longevity, and is usually a make or break for a video game.
Some video game sequels can be an absolute killer to its entire franchise. I mean, look at Assassin's Creed Unity, that not only broke its franchise, but also broke the credibility of the entire company at Ubisoft. Unity had a buggy launch with missing facial textures and a broken parkour system, which was only fixable with a 40GB update patch. The game was in such a bad state, in fact, especially in the consumer's eyes, that Ubisoft gave away the DLC for the game for free. And after the poor sales of Assassin's Creed Syndicate due to Unity's reception, Ubisoft had to reinvent the wheel. The buggy and poorly optimized mess that was Unity caused a reinvention for the entire franchise, starting with Assassin's Creed Origins. And although the franchise is not the same as what it once was, at least it's trying to pull through. Another factor into having a sequel feel fresh and new is not having the newer game feel like an expansion pack. You want a fresh experience, something familiar but not exactly the same. A new world just doesn't cut it anymore, I'm afraid. The Division 1 and 2's worlds are fairly similar, and although the Division 2 does have more open environments, you don't need to see more of the same, but more of the new. Destiny 2 recycled the moon aspects from the first game, hence it feels more like an expansion than a real addition to the game. It's an easy trap to fall into for developers, as they want the game to still feel familiar to the player base, but usually the trap is sprung pretty early on in a game's life cycle, and sadly it's a killer. Multiplayer games have a more massive contribution to poor sequels than anything else. I'd say a good multiplayer sequel is one that comes out for a few years, so 2 or 3 years before a new game in the franchise comes out. It gives a game time to breathe and really get to live its lifespan to the fullest, whereas most companies release a new game every year. Imagine working on a game in a franchise and then all your work is forgotten by the next year. I know, it's absolutely baffling, and if that was me in the developer's chair, I would be so infuriated. Publishers would rather pump out a mediocre sequel than to take time and develop one that has a long-lasting appeal. It just truly baffles me how they can't get this into their thick skulls. Publishers should just get the developers to release a game and then update it for a few years and then start work on a new sequel that adds so much more. Like EA with Battlefront 1 and then Battlefront 2. It's basically night and day.
So these are some factors that contribute to a good and bad sequel. Many publishers just seem to not care anymore, and it is such a shame. A sequel should be a new, fresh and exciting experience, not a waste of time for everyone else. Because if you're going to waste people's time, what's the point in that? Exactly. There isn't one. There is not a point at all. And yet, good sequels are cast in the shadows of bad sequels. Whenever you see a gaming video, it usually revolves around why a game is bad or just something along those lines, but not primarily focusing on the positives. There have been so many people that have slaved away and worked on a game for so long, and they've worked so hard to give it to all of us. So let's try and appreciate the good sequels for more than a day, rather than focusing on the bad sequels for a lifetime. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, then subscribe and turn on that notification button so you don't miss another upload from me. So thank you and goodbye.